I think today's video is going to be a bit of an interesting one. At the time of me recording this, it is the same day that I decided to listen to the Caretaker's album, An Empty Bliss Beyond This World. And after experiencing that album, I'm sure like one of the biggest questions you have is like, how do I feel? And honestly, I don't feel anything. And when I say I don't feel anything, I don't mean that the experience of listening to that album didn't have an impact, because it certainly did. What I mean when I say I don't feel anything is it's this sort of emptiness that I really will struggle to describe with words. So for those who don't know, An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is another album by the Caretaker, who's obviously most well known for his work Everywhere at the End of Time. But An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is a shorter album at around 50-odd minutes that some people have described as sort of the prequel to Everywhere at the End of Time, or a precursor to it in the Caretaker's lore, and it's been recommended as sort of a way to dip your toes in the water of what you can experience when you listen to the Caretaker's music. And I don't remember the full details of my experience. I rarely do when I experience certain things like this, but what I remember is, as I was listening to the album, when I started, it had this sort of very relaxed tone to it, with sort of this nostalgic feel, like a lot of the Caretaker's music tends to do when it's in its most coherent form. And I sort of allowed myself to just close my eyes and drift off into this sort of trance state where I was kind of listening to the music, but it wasn't at the front of my mind, and the music sort of eased me into this state of almost non-thinking. But I was occasionally sort of jarred a little back into reality when either a song ended abruptly. There were a few songs, I believe, that would gradually fade out towards the end, but the very first song did abruptly end and then cut straight into the second song, so those sort of jarred me back to reality. Another thing that happened in the album was when there was a noticeable increase in the volume of the sort of vinyl artifacts in the music. So all the songs had these like crackling and like low bassy vinyl artifacts in the background, and in some of the songs they would become noticeably more prominent, and that sort of snapped me back to listening a little more closely to the album. And the songs varied in a different sort of small range of sounds too, and different tones that they sort of set up. Like the first song was very relaxed, the second song, or maybe it wasn't the second song, but one of the songs sounded like something I could just kind of like, you know, kind of go like this to, like while, I don't know, doing something on the computer or something like that. Or it's just something that could like, I guess, perk me up when I'm doing an otherwise mundane task. And towards the end of the album, as I was allowing myself to sort of drift away from the music and into this sort of state of non-thinking again, the very last song in the album very harshly suddenly just like jarred me straight back into giving the music my full attention again. And for however many minutes, I wasn't even keeping track. For that number of minutes, I just heard like this distorted singing voice. I actually struggled to determine whether it was a singing voice or a synthesizer with these occasional brass chords, and it was all very like harsh and grating with very noticeable vinyl artifacts compared to all the songs that had come before it. And it sort of snapped me back into the world that this album was creating very harshly, and then the album just ended. I had like a continuous mix of the album on repeat, and when that last song ended and it cut back to the first song again, I almost didn't believe that was the end of the album, and the first song was repeating again for some other reason. But no, it that was the end of the album. Just this comparatively grating, synthesized sounding singing voice with these occasional wayward, dissonant brass chords over some very heavy vinyl artifacting. And then it just stopped. I am like really, I'm still like thinking about what this album means, and I'm still like stuck on what exactly to take away from it. And like, even as I think about it right now, it's just it was such a like out of body experience that, again, it's something that I really cannot put into words even a handful of hours after, you know, my listen through of the album concluded. I know that a lot of the work that the Caretaker has done under that particular alias revolves around your mental state, and especially its degradation with age, and this becomes especially apparent in Everywhere at the End of Time, which I still need to listen to. I just haven't figured out like when I want to cut out a full day to listen through the entire experience of that album. But I could very much see some of that sort of intended symbolism behind the degradation of one's mental state with age as I listen to An Empty Bliss Beyond This World. Because at the very end, when it sort of jarred me back into the album, the way I perceive it, because I didn't look at as much documentation on An Empty Bliss Beyond This World as I have so far for Everywhere at the End of Time, is that it could mean one of two things. It could mean either you were starting to forget, and that last song sort of represented a temporary snapping back to reality. Or it could be the opposite, where that realization that you're beginning to forget first hits you. And both of those interpretations to me are equally impactful. And overall, this album and the experience I got from it has just left me contemplating, like, everything. The thing about An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is it's really what it says on the tin. I was allowing myself, as I listened to this album, to relax and enter this sort of trance-like state of non-thinking. And it was indeed a very empty bliss that felt out of body and beyond this world. The Caretaker did a really good job of putting those feelings into music with the production techniques that he used, like sampling these old ballroom-style songs into an experience that I would struggle to forget if I tried. And I mean, you know, the experience is immersive when hours after going through it. I guess the best way I could describe it is like the sort of dorselessness emotion from the Thalison Plus, that one analog horror video that sort of started the Uncanny Valley trend in the analog horror scene. But my point is, that image alone of dorselessness, taken outside the context of the Thalison Plus video, says a lot of things. It sort of pretty accurately conveys the feeling I have after listening to this album. Because, as I said earlier in this video, I don't feel anything. I don't know what to feel other than this sort of hollowness that I never felt before. Again, it's something that I can't really put into words, but it's a very out-of-body experience that you really only get so many times in a lifetime. So, I'm not entirely sure what else to say beyond that, because I've probably repeated some of my points a number of times throughout this recording, just because I wanted to speak off the top of my head and see where it goes. But the Caretaker's An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is a musical experience that I would definitely recommend to somebody who wants to dabble in the Caretaker's work without cutting out a day to go through the full 6.5-hour experience of Everywhere at the End of Time. Can I recommend it? even if you've already listened to and experienced Everywhere at the End of Time. That's a conclusion that I don't think I could reach until I actually listen to Everywhere at the End of Time, which hopefully I'll take a day out to do soon, and then I can come back to that and discuss my thoughts on that in a recording as well. But for now, An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is, like I said, you sort of get an experience that is perfectly described by the name of the album. It is an empty bliss beyond this world, this very hollow, out-of-body trance-like state of non-thinking where you're just sort of taking the music in. It's not an unpleasant experience, but at the same time it's not a pleasant one either. It just sort of is. And when you close your eyes and let yourself get immersed in the music, you start to feel like you're just kind of there, existing in this incomprehensible void that we call our reality. And it sort of isolates you in that moment, where all you can really experience are your sort of thoughts and feelings or lack thereof as the music plays. So I will have a link to the continuous mix of An Empty Bliss Beyond This World linked in the description. I will warn you before you decide to listen to it that while the experience isn't necessarily disturbing per se, as people tend to describe Everywhere at the End of Time, you will definitely have a stronger, almost visceral reaction to it than you might experience to get out of a musical album if you've never listened to a Caretaker experience like this before. It will leave you with just this very strange feeling for the rest of the afternoon, or the rest of the day, or whatever duration. It will have a lasting impact on you, much like it did on me. Because upon hearing the very first song, I certainly wasn't expecting it to have the impact on me that it did. But now, here I am just kind of continuing to ponder that experience and think about, like, what is this hollowness that I'm feeling? And I just am left questioning, like, what do I take away from this? How do I start to feel anything again after what happened? And especially for the latter question, I think the answer to that will come naturally over the course of a night or two. But the impact that this experience leaves is definitely a very heavy one. So don't take the experience of listening to An Empty Bliss Beyond This World lightly. Even if you know that it does not have anywhere near as strong as an impact as Everywhere at the End of Time, it will still sort of leave you not feeling the same as you did before you started listening. So yeah, those are just my sort of thoughts on this musical experience that I decided to go on, because listening to Everywhere at the End of Time has been something that's been on my to-do list for a while, ever since I was sort of made aware of its existence. And the scariest thing for me was the impact that it could potentially have. And I don't think listening to An Empty Bliss Beyond This World necessarily lessened or will lessen the impact of Everywhere at the End of Time, but at the very least, it gives me a little bit of an insight into what to expect and how I will process the things I feel as I listen to more of the Caretaker's musical experiences going forward. So I'm not entirely sure how to end this video, because I've already been rambling for quite a bit and probably repeating certain points over and over. Ironic for me listening to a musician whose main theme is about the decay of memory with age and forgetting. But I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll definitely revisit making content about the Caretaker when I've listened to Everywhere at the End of Time. Because as someone who is very passionate about music, I've thought about how I could formulate a true experience with music, and I've even made attempts at it in the past with the Paper Lungs trilogy and the night I almost said goodbye. But I feel like nothing I try could ever even come close to creating an experience that the Caretaker does with his albums. And that to me is something very special. So yeah, I'll leave this video at that. Continue to sort of ponder this experience and the impact it's had. And I think that'll be about it. I'll see you again in this setting when I've listened to Everywhere at the End of Time and gotten a longer, more immersive experience in the Caretaker's work with a stronger impact. And yeah, I will see you in another video to discuss that. So that's about it. I will see you around.